Get the whole house here. Man, this looks positive. We up and rolling? Not quite. Not quite. I'll just give it a second, guys. We got 3D Harris there. Looks like Lego Harris.
Lego Harris.
Now it's Emperor Harris.
And now we're live.
And we're live. Sweet. All right. Well, we got a lot to cover today, actually. We'll try to move really quickly. We got a bunch of images, some from Charleston, a bunch from Cuba. We're all just back from Cuba. We got a full house as far as administration goes. We got Woody and Darren and David Archer and Rick and I all here today. So I thought I'd start off today. We'll make a couple quick announcements, but the agenda is kind of take a look at the results from Lightroom's new noise reduction, because I'm getting kind of swamped upon my return home with people asking what I think of it. And I like it a lot. And then a little talk about Nikon's 85 1.2 that I took to Cuba. And then we'll look at some images from Cuba and Charleston from both Rick and I, and take a few questions from folks. But Rick, you got a couple announcements to put out really quick, maybe the next office hours?
Yeah, next office hours will be on May 23rd, and we're going to do a gallery. And this time we're going to do a black and white gallery. So submit one of your favorite or your best black and white image. If you don't shoot a lot of black and white, turn your camera into black and white mode and go out and spend some time working and submit some images. And we'll go through them on the 23rd. We'll also take questions where possible.
It's been a real revelation for me shooting in the monochrome mode, both with the Leica Q2 I've been shooting with and with my Nikon. You know, I kind of started doing it with the Leica, moved over and started doing it with the Nikon. And, you know, I still shoot a full color RAW file, but looking at that image, looking at harsh light situations, whether it's streets at night or whether it's the landscape in the middle of the day, in black and white, sort of just, it's a different experience, and it really has you working with tone a little bit better. And sometimes I convert it to color, and sometimes I stick with the black and white, but I think it's a really good experience for everyone. So even if you haven't been doing it, give it a shot and submit an image. All right. So anything else, Rick?
That's all I got. That's all I got right now.
All right. We're just all back. I haven't even completely gotten unpacked. If you were to look behind my desk out near the camera spinning right now, you'd just see a massive bags partially unpacked. So we're all kind of getting off of a lot of time on workshops between Charleston and Cuba, and it's been really fun. Learned a ton in the process. So I'm gonna jump in, and the first thing I want to talk about, I'm going to share my screen here, is Lightroom's new denoise engine. And I think if you've been following me for any period of time, you know that I'm a big fan of what DxO has been doing, and also On1 with their no noise, which the only problem with it is that if you're someone like me who likes to work in Adobe Camera Raw and Lightroom's Velvet module, which is sort of the same thing, you had to have another piece of software interpreting your raw file and demosaicing it. In other words, taking those ones and zeros and turning it into a file and combing the noise out while holding onto the detail. And then you'd get a linear file back in a DNG wrapper, but it's not a true raw file anymore to be completely processed by Adobe's engine. And so we've been excited and waiting for Adobe to bring this to the masses. I'm going to jump into it.
We knew it was coming. We knew it was yeah, this has been kind of the big change over the last few years, is this whole new noise demosaicing. So
right. I mean, it's like, because so many different products, from Topaz's original denoise to DxO's to On1, you just know Adobe's watching, and that they've got scads of engineers looking at how everyone else is doing it, and with the mission statement, do it as well or better. Yeah. And so they have, in my opinion, they've brought it out, and you know, it's now integrated into my favorite RAW processor, which is Lightroom's Develop module, or Adobe Camera Raw. And I'm going to just jump into a compare view. And what we're looking at right now is the latest DxO on the right, versus a Lightroom file. And I did a video on this particular image. This was an image I captured. I can't remember the name of this bird in Costa Rica, but it was deep in the brush in a really dark space. And I happened to be photographing a toucan that was really far away at 1120 millimeters. This is my 800 PF wide open with a 1.4 teleconverter on it, which makes it an f9. And, I was still shooting at a really fast shutter speed for this toucan in case it took flight. And I throttled my shutter speed back, took the 1.4 teleconverter off before this bird moved, and got a nice clean image at like 400 ISO. But the initial shots I got, just to make sure I got a shot, were surprisingly sharp for being handheld at 1120 millimeters, but noisy because it was shot at 12,800 ISO. And so, this is what it looked like running through DxO's new DxO3, the Deep Prime X2 or whatever it was called. And one of the things I've noticed with Deep Prime is it does a great job getting rid of noise without creating any artifacts. Some software out there creates some artifacts that bug me in the out of focus details. This does a great job holding detail where it should, not adding it where it shouldn't, and just getting the noise out of it. But it's interesting how it always affects tone a little bit running through DxO's RAW processor. You can see it's added contrast, darkened the entire image. I'm going to switch and show you what it looks like run through Lightroom's new denoise that's built into Develop. Now, we haven't completely figured out exactly why Adobe is doing this. They are creating a new file, a new DNG from your original RAW file when you do this, but it stacks it automatically and it does it much, much faster than anybody else's software that I've seen. But if you take a look here and zoom in and compare view to the original file versus this new Lightroom file, it isn't really affecting tone at all. And it's doing just as good a job as DxO, in my opinion. I mean, look at that.
Yeah.
Fantastic. And then
I think part of the reason, Hudson, that you don't see as much of a contrast change is that the entire image stays within the Camera Raw workflow. It never, DxO is using its own raw processor to demosaic the image, apply that sharpening and noise reduction, and then saving that linear DNG.
And then I'm going to show one more here. This is the DNG after I did a little just tonal adjustment to add contrast and set the black and white point. There's really not anything else done to this. But, just going back and forth here, pretty darned amazing. If I go back into my loop view. Hang on one sec. There we go. It's an amazing difference. Oh, we just hold on. I'll go into my loop view. Just crazy difference here between the original noisy image. It's nice to stay completely in Adobe's workflow. Then you can jump in and do a little distraction removal. I jumped into Photoshop and just did a little content aware fill. And this is not the best image that I shot of this bird, but it's still at 12,800 ISO. It's pretty darned amazing. So for me, I'm quite happy with sticking inside of Lightroom for noise reduction at this point. I think it would be nice, and I'm not exactly sure. We're gonna work on this. Why they're creating a DNG from your original RAW file in order to make this happen, but it probably has something to do with processing speed. What do you think, Rick?
I think so.
Yeah.
For people who are interested in digging a little bit deeper into Adobe's, what Adobe was doing here, Eric Chan, who's one of their lead scientists, who's been working on Camera Raw since the beginning, he had a great blog post announcing this that really sort of goes into a bunch of detail. I'll put a link in the chat here, and Darren can put it in the YouTube chat window as well. So if you're interested in sort of really, it's a pretty deep dive into it, but talking about why they did it and all that sort of stuff. So I'm pretty impressed as well, just with the stuff that I've done. I did a bunch of stuff last week when I was coming back from Cuba, on some images that I shot that were pretty high ISO. My only real complaint about it was, I'm running on an older Intel-based MacBook Pro, with, 32 gigs of RAM on it, I think, and it was pretty slow. But I'm looking forward to playing around with it on my Mac Studio today. So
It was very fast on my Mac Studio, especially when compared to DxO. And there's nothing wrong with DxO. But I don't know that I'll be upgrading to whatever version 4 is now that I have it in Lightroom. And I don't know that I'll be waiting for 5 minutes for those files to get fully rendered and imported back into the catalog. There's some weird thing with their plugin.
Yeah.
Okay, so the next thing I want to talk really briefly about is the fact that I had Nikon's long-awaited 85 1.2 with me in Cuba, and I shot with it extensively. And in Cuba, I shot a lot with my little Leica Q2, which is a fixed 28 millimeter, a really nice fixed 28 millimeter. And I shot a lot with my Nikon Z6 II, not this Z9. I'm filming right now with the Z6 II, which is the only reason I don't have it here. Just because the Z9 was too big and heavy for me to want to lug around the streets, I shot with the Z6 II with that 85 1.2 on it. But as soon as I got home, I sent it back. And it's not because it's not a great lens. It's a fantastic lens. But before I left, I shot some comparison shots between it and my 105 1.4, which I have long loved. It's an F-mount lens. It's one of the best of the F-mount lenses that they ever made. It's kind of unique being a 105 1.4. You can't find very many of those out there. And the thing that surprised me a little bit was that even on the FTZ adapter, it's in every dimension significantly smaller than the new 85 1.2. It's significantly lighter, and it's a screaming deal right now. If I was to sell this, MPB is only willing to give me less than $800 for it, and the new 85 1.2 is nearly $3,000. So for me, lighter, cheaper, and I didn't notice a huge differences in images. I think if you're doing video and you need the silent focusing, I found that the focus was just as fast on this lens, and maybe it's slightly slower, but not enough to be a problem. And it's still really sharp. And I'll show you a few examples, and then we'll jump into some stuff from Cuba. But right before I left, I did a few shots just of my kids. I'll close down my film strip so you can see a little bigger. And you can see which lens. This is the 85. This is the new 85 1.2. Obviously, really beautiful. Here's the 105 1.4. Sure, maybe there's a slight little edginess to a little bit of the bokeh, but it was bokeh that made me happy as a clam when I first got it, and I'm still really pleased with it. Here's Pike. This is the 85 1.2. Here's the 105. Still just beautiful image separation. When I got back, I mailed the 85 back just because, I'm not first and foremost a portrait photographer. I'm a travel, landscape, adventure photographer. So the times when I need that kind of a portrait lens are rarer, and I'm so happy with the 105. Plus, it gives me a little more distance and separation, especially for street photography or night work with people. And so I just, yesterday, actually picking up the kids from school, we had a really nice day before yesterday. And I thought I'll just take the 105 along and just take some shots on the way home from school. And, it's kind of like being in Cuba, like getting that image separation, your subject versus the background, and nice and fast focusing, certainly no lack of sharpness. And this is with the Z9, just straight out of the camera. To me, I already have what I need in the 105 1.4. I would say this, if portraits are your bread and butter and you make good money on it, the 85 1.2 is as good a lens for a Nikon shooter with the Z system as you can get. But, if you just want that ability to do beautiful portraits and separate your subject from the background at a little more distance, that 105 1.4, because of the 85 1.2 coming out, is a pretty screaming deal right now. And it's no slouch on the FTZ adapter at all. So let's jump into Cuba. And Rick, feel free to jump in at any time. Mm-hmm. I'm going to go through some images of mine. I'll go pretty fast because there's a lot. Cuba was just a very, very wonderful 3 weeks that Rick and I spent there. We had 2 great workshops with a bunch of fantastic photographers. And, my challenge to myself on this trip was to stretch a little bit more in the street and photographing people. And as I said, I mainly just carried the Leica Q2 in a little side holster that I could grab easily while I had the 85-1.2 slung on my Z6 II on the other side. And I shot with those two lenses almost exclusively. There were times when I took the 24-120 out on the Nikon, particularly in the landscape, and sometimes just to vary it up and shoot a little bit differently. But you can see, as you look through this, you'll see that what the settings are and what lens I'm using, and you're going to see predominantly the 28mm of the Q2 and the 85mm. You can see what camera I'm using up here in the file name and settings right here. So if anybody's curious, we shot a lot of street photography. I love what the 82 or the 85 does with separating subjects from the background. You know, here's Rick talking to some of our Workshop 2 crew just out on a street. The streets of Cuba are absolutely the perfect place to photograph people and to work on street photography because it's just a welcoming environment. You know, I frequently heard our workshop participants saying, you know, I've never felt so safe photographing in a city, or these people have so little and yet they're so happy. That was kind of the constant refrain from people. And we had an amazing local guide, Diana, who, you know, worked really hard to keep us safe despite our best efforts to get into trouble. I jumped in front of these guys. Now it's with an 85. I got the shot and got out of the way before I really made him slow down. But you know, and just playing around. This mom and child, I noticed, were FaceTiming in this doorway, and I had been stopped down to shoot something in really bright light and get a little more depth of field with the 85. And I didn't even notice, you know, that kind of, we were just warming up and getting used to photographing the streets. And this just shows what the image stabilization in these cameras is capable of. I'm hand holding an 85 at 1/10 of a second here, and everything's sharp except the guy walking into the scene. You know, when I saw the settings and felt how the shutter sounded, I said, oh, I blew that shot. And then I looked at it and it's like, wow, this is crazy. The little Q2 was such a nice thing to just have to run around with and have that wider angle. This is underneath a fruit cart out in the street. And as I said, you know, in bright daylight, in those harsh lighting conditions, the black and white just worked so well. I was just constantly looking for little interesting things happening in the streets, you know, those little moments, like how everyone's attention is drawn to this couple walking down the street, particularly the woman, but it's just like the guy's attitudes out on the street and just the scenes of Cuba. You know, music is huge there. This guy popped out his door like on his way to go play somewhere and saw all this, and someone started taking his photo, and then he just sets up and starts playing the most beautiful trumpet music. He actually hung the flag behind him, and of course, we all tossed him a nice tip afterwards. He played a couple of songs for us, and our guide Diana is like, he just made more than he made in the last month. He's probably going back to bed. One of the things while we were moving through the city, though, was getting connected with people. You know, I think if you're going to take people's pictures, you know, there's the surreptitious shots that we do where you're trying not to disrupt what's happening in the street. And then there are those shots where you develop a rapport with someone. And, you know, this is Roxana, who served Rick and I our cortalitos, which are these little shots of espresso with some foamed milk on top. And we were frequent visitors there and kind of developed a rapport. And she got comfortable with us photographing her. This is this guy who was constantly wanting to cut my hair and trim my beard. He's a barber who
did trim Charlie's beard.
He did. He actually, Charlie, I think Charlie got a full haircut and beard trimming from him. But he was constantly teasing me and, you know, giving me a high five as I went by. And then one day I had the 85 I'm making. I was like, can I take your photo? He's like, sure, and posed, you know, and we had a connection. This is a gal who gave Rick and I a salsa lesson up on this rooftop before the workshop got there, Yvette. And as you can see, the 85 is a really fun lens to photograph people with. The Leica is a great little camera to be running through the streets with too. You know, having that 28mm with the 1.7 aperture lets you really bring someone's attention to what's sharp and in focus. This girl was so cute. And the people in Cuba are, you know, I asked if I could take this guy's photo, and he's like, I don't know why he's taking a photo of me eating fried food in my window, but sure. And then there are moments where you kind of want to be a little more surreptitious. You don't necessarily want to point a camera in this guy's face. I actually took this from my hip with the 24-120. And I just had autofocus with face detect on, and it's going to choose the closest subject. And I found that works really well. Throw it in burst mode, stay wide at 24, and you can shoot from the hip or tuck it under your arm. And it doesn't look like you're shooting at all, but you can get those kind of natural city street scenes as you're running along. Same thing with the Leica. The Leica, you can pre-focus it at hyperfocal distance at say f11 and put it at 125 and just let the auto ISO take care of exposure and shoot it. Here's a shot like that. You can see I had it set f11, 1/25th of a second. I've got hyperfocal distance set so that anything from about 2 feet in front of the camera to infinity is going to be in focus, and you can just shoot. These kids remind me of like the Stranger Thing kids of Havana. They got the whole cast right there. I was sometimes you're just framing up on street art or an interesting doorway, and then stuff happens. Like this guy with an orange shirt walks out as if on cue. I don't know. There's something about this scene. I was drawn to the car, and then I noticed the painting crew in the background and the woman watching him work, and I kind of wound up reframing. And I love that the guy who seems to be kind of directing stuff has a bottle of wine in his hand. The whole thing, like it's just a fabulous place to photograph people. Here again, framing up on the fish. Nobody on the street even thinks about being in the photo. The street just kind of happens naturally. And the other thing about Havana is just the spectacular, old stuff. This is on a fort that was the oldest fort in the Americas. This, guy's sitting on a cannon there. This is the Morro across the inlet to the harbor. And it's just a huge fortress with a lighthouse built in. And the old cars. I mean, it's almost cliched in Cuba, but and even the new weird little taxis, like there's just so much interesting, and riding in the old cars is a blast. We had so much fun. I think Loretta
It was
here.
definitely one of the highlights. Everyone loved sort of going out and riding through the streets of Havana in these convertibles.
Yeah. I don't know how the spotlight came down on Miriam for this shot, but I saw it and snapped it just in time.
Yeah.
It's like stage lighting, and I played around a little bit. This is with the Leica, and I just set the shutter speed at a 15th of a second and tried to hold really still and fired it in burst mode. Channeling my inner Man Ray a little bit there. Even the drivers are cool. The cars are cool. We'd go out to Revolution Square and photograph the cars. There's Charlie's son, Jeremy, who's AKA the Gringo. We had a ton of fun. And shooting details. Another thing that's just shocking about that 24-120 lens, which is kind of the workhorse of my stable of Nikon lenses, is how close that lens focuses without an extension tube. This is straight up an inch from this hood ornament. Just then, after we were done at Revolution Square, we'd drive back at magic hour and in the golden hour and get to the Malecone to photograph sunset by the old fort. It's a pretty great time. Just good stuff. There's the inlet to the harbor. And then, walking the streets at night was one of my absolute favorite things.
Yeah.
And the city's just got such amazing art and architecture and street land. At night, everybody comes out, and it seems like every block is a little bit of a street party. Here's the effect of color versus black and white in the same spot. There's Rick's Hemingway moment there. We're always looking for those moments in the street lights. You're watching people come towards you and waiting for the street light. But the old architecture, here's one of those old forts along the inlet. We had a beautiful dawn. And then I realized what was happening with the clouds. And I took a group and ran around the back, and we climbed up and shot it through this crazy wrought iron fence. You had to climb up to get that angle on it. But finding leading lines and doing the same kind of things like we do in the landscape with the old architecture, and being out at dawn in the city, it's like there's almost no one out. You have this beautiful old place to yourself. And then, of course, there's the cigars. This is actually up at this wonderful apartment that the head of the art department at the University of Havana has with his family, and his wife is this amazing artist with mixed medium and reclaimed materials, and his son is a professor in the photography department, and we shared photography and had a great home cooked meal there, the whole workshop. And the cats of Havana, this one just had crazy eyes, huh? We just had a ton of fun. There's lots of animals and cute kids. Here's an interesting one. Charlie and I swapped lenses. If you just don't want to think about a 105 f mount lens, the 85 1.8, there's nothing wrong with the image separation and blur background with that lens. Charlie and I switched, and I shot quite a bit with the 85 1.8, and I will say it is about a third of the size and weight of the 85 1.2 and a fifth of the price, and does a great job.
Yeah.
Of course, the 85 1.2 is just somewhat special. There's no two ways about it. And then we went out in the countryside to Viñales, which is this beautiful limestone formations. They call them magotes. They're like these little limestone mountains and cliffs, and there's caves all through them. And this is Hernan, who owns this old car, and we had a ton of fun running around with him. This is our guide, Floyd, who has the king of dad jokes. He's literally the king of dad jokes. And he took us to this little farm where they grow tobacco, and Geraldo hand rolls cigars, and his mother, Clara, smokes them in beautiful light if you pose her, and enjoys hamming it up with the groups of tourists despite having no English. And her great granddaughter's there. I'm actually, the second time I went and I had a little more rapport with her, I actually got a real, heartful photo of her with her great granddaughter. Our workshop students, it's fun to photograph them like they're in some kind of a gangster movie. And the farms are filled with, all kinds of livestock. This is one where I channeled my inner David Archer and got down on my stomach in the dirt to get the photo of this curious little piglet. We ate an amazing organic farm and farm to table restaurant that Miguel helps to run. And then he loves to run around posing with his cigar all over the farm for you. We did a beautiful hike up into the Magote Highlands where you got the sun rising right over a Magote. And the second time I went, I had loaned my tripod out, and all I did was took my little Q2. And, this is an example to me of why you don't need graduated neutral density filters anymore. I mean, this is just shot with my Q2 handheld with it set to bracket 3 frames, 1 on the meter, 1 3 stops underexposed, 1 3 stops overexposed. And look at the natural highlight and shadow retention blending those 3 files. It's just amazing what you can do. There's no way a hard-edged filter would do that. You'd have a black top of Chap's head. This is again, a bracketed set of 3 images out of the Q2 handheld. Really worked out well. And then I'll jump in. I'll let Rick. This is a shot. Rick handed me his little Sony it's the RX1.
RX1. Yep.
RX1
well, Model 2, but yeah.
Model. Yeah.
It's
you can talk about that
portable.
for a second. Yeah, you go for it, Rick.
It's an old camera. It's like really is sort of shooting old school. But it's got a beautiful 35 millimeter f2 Zeiss lens on it. It's a rangefinder. It literally fits in my pocket, and it's one of my favorite cameras to shoot with all time.
There'll be a photo of it in Charleston in a minute.
Yeah. But this one actually was shot with the Sony and my 85 mm f1.8, which I just love. It's a light lens. It focuses really fast, and it's got good bokeh. So,
It does.
This was one of our waiters at one of the restaurants we ate at, and he reminded me of someone we would see in Portland, and just sort of asked him at the end of the dinner, could I take his picture? And then this is just out in the streets. This woman I saw, and I asked if I could take her picture, and she wanted money, and so I gave her 100 pesos, which is well under $1, and she was like, she wanted one more. So, but
she gave you a good smile.
Yeah, yep, she did. And we went to see the Buena Vista Social Club one night, and we were sitting in the back, and there was this smoking room right behind us with glassed-in windows, and this woman was one of the divas. She's one of the original Buena Vista Social Club people, and I kept looking back as she was smoking the cigar, and I had my 85 on, and I surreptitiously taking pictures, but I couldn't quite get the right perspective. So a little bit later, I just went for it and just sort of stood up and just started shooting her, and she finally saw me and just gave me this look. And afterwards, I showed her the image on the back of my camera, and she gave me a little thumbs up and blew me a kiss. And it's one of my favorite portraits of all time is this one.
I love that shot.
You know?
Through the window.
Yep. And then, Hudson, I did not smoke a cigar. I put one in my mouth, but that was about as much as I did. Hudson, for the first time we went, he took the bullet for the team, I think. But that was such an amazing experience. This small tobacco farm, they basically grow tobacco. 90% of it goes to the Cuban government, for which they get paid, and then they have 10% which they can keep and use for whatever they want. And so, people sort of come through the valley, stop here. He rolls cigars, and he sells them to people. We went there 3 times, and I loved that place. Just wonderful people.
They have a traditional way of filtering their water through this stone too. They have this porous local stone that they carve into this thing, and they'll pour it full of water, and then it drips down into this catch basin with a ladle, and you ladle water out into your cup. And they filled our filtered water bottles, and it was the best tasting water I had in the entire trip.
Yeah. I love shooting at night. And, that same night I shot the waiter, we're coming out, and this guy across the street was just working on his calculator, and, it was like, boom.
Also loves shooting the cats wherever we go.
Yeah, lots of cats. Hudson was the cat magnet. Many of them were rather scruffy and scraggly looking. I know. And again, sort of just being out shooting in the middle of the day, just going black and white in a polarizer, it just sort of gives you a different perspective and lets you get out there shooting, This is sort of in the same area. We were at that coffee shop, and just, I just love the way that 85 just handles a scene like this. And, it's like, I don't know if the other image is in here, but I was walking along the streets with Hudson and the group, and I'm looking through my lens, and I see this group of people talking, there's 3 people, and I catch this woman's eye with my camera up, and I start walking over, and she just does this little pose for me, and was just, and we run into this all the time, these people who were just so happy to pose.
Yeah, it really is. I think Havana and Cuba in general is just like an amazing place to go on a workshop and hone your people photographing skills, because the people are so amenable to it.
Yep. And just fun stuff happening on the street.
I need a light.
Yeah. Yeah. I know. And just this woman was getting a picture taken by her boyfriend and was a little bored, I think, and just, it's like, boom.
Yeah. Well, she was checking her makeup in the phone, wasn't she?
Yes, she was. But at this point, he was still, I stood there for a while he's doing it. And finally, I was like, all right, I'm going to take her picture. You
have a habit of that. You take pictures of people taking pictures of their.
Here was another one. We were looking at this car, which is you see lots of the old, 50s cars and 50s American cars, but this one was, I don't remember what it was, but this woman was like just sitting on it, and
the Austin Healey.
Yeah, it was actually, it was a better picture than I got of the car just by itself.
Yeah, it's better than my picture of the car by itself. Yeah, I waited for this to be over, and you got the better shot.
This is our driver, Jose. He's just wonderful. I loved sort of riding in this convertible.
Yeah, with Jose. Jose was just cool. He's a cool cat.
and just, there's just so many things happening. This beautiful night where there wasn't much of a sunset, but
No,
everyone was happy and out there running around. And,
that was the night where I took the photo of this guy in the Canon from the opposite angle, and you're coming at it from the side, and it's a completely different shot. Look at that Canon.
yeah.
Huge. I love the kite in the background too. This is one where I saw your shot and I'm like, where was that? And you're like, it's in the restaurant. We just had dinner in. And I was like,
Yeah.
oh.
Yeah. I shooting at night was just so wonderful. It really was absolutely wonderful. Just sort of going out in the streets and you can sort of see what's happening. And sometimes it's people out on the stoop. Sometimes it's just lone people walking down and you're just waiting for them to come into the light. I just loved it, and the buildings, there are buildings that are falling apart and buildings that have been fixed up. And, you're looking in people's homes on the first floor of these streets, and they're just, the building looks like it's falling apart, and you can see inside that, people really take care of their places. And,
Yeah.
So
your take on the same hood ornament.
Yeah.
Yeah. Cool with the sky.
Yeah.
Oh, and
that morning in Vinales was just so wonderful. I think I got a shot of the barbed wire.
Right here.
I got my barbed wire shot of the trip. So,
To do a book on barbed wire.
Vinales is one of the most beautiful places I truly think I've ever been. That valley was just something else.
It really is.
Yeah.
It
was just a rooftop restaurant, not even a restaurant. It was just sort of a place where you could have dinner. And, we just sort of had that place to ourselves this one night, which is this beautiful sunset with these gorgeous clouds. And
yeah, it was amazing.
Just being out at night. Yeah, just being out at night and just sort of shooting, that's where the RX1 just sort of really fit so well. I mean, it's small, unobtrusive, it's 40 megapixels, so it's got plenty of resolution. It takes forever to write an image, but and I was fascinated by the stairways at night. During the day I got some good shots, but it was like half of the shots I shot at night were just, you look in these doorways and they're just these just beautiful stairways. Although our good friend Elizabeth got the stairway shot of the workshops, I think, where she got this beautiful black and white shot of this one stairway with a guy coming down, and it was just a beautiful shot.
You wondered, is Harry Potter under these stairs?
Yeah.
And look at how the stairs are like braced with.
Yeah, there's a lot of jerry rigging of
on the electrical. I'm sure that electricians that just have conniption fits looking at the wiring in these buildings.
Yeah. And just, the cars are just as beautiful at night as they are during the day. I'm just, and here's Gringo, everywhere he went, he'd be talking to people, and these kids, he had this little ball toy, and,
Japanese,
he'd let the kids play with it. And, this one night when we were out, it was just amazing. And I got back and I looked, and, I had a whole bunch of images from this sequence, but this one with the little kid looking up, just, it's just really,
it's fabulous.
And again, just, it's like I'm looking down alleyways and I can see where the light is, and you can see people coming down, and just sort of, as they come into the light, just capturing them, this guy was watching Hudson come all the way down the street, and, I just sort of scooted up quickly so I could get in there and just boom, and just making sure he's okay.
I love this shot.
We were out in the morning, we're on our way to shoot sunrise, and I look down the street and there's this guy just sort of washing and sweeping his stoop. Two guys who were talking as I'm walking all down, and I can see these guys, and they're talking and looking at their phone, And, as I walked by, the light was just beautiful,
I love this picture.
And this one, I actually stood there for about 5 minutes watching people come down, and I saw this one guy coming down, and as he started coming into the light, I'm shooting him, and then all of a sudden this cat comes flying out.
Right as he
And
hit the light.
yeah, and it was like boom, and it's just, this I think is actually my favorite photo from the trip. It's just, I can't wait to print it.
You got the rule of threes thing happening too with
Yeah.
this little motorbike and the cat and the guy. And I love that it's a security guard too. It's
Yeah.
just... All right.
Yeah.
Well, Rick and I are, it was an amazing 3 weeks in Cuba. We are happy to be home, but I will
Yes.
say I can't wait to get back with another group of people. I think probably 2025. We have a pretty solid set of workshops planned for next year, but we're already starting to work on going back to Cuba in 2025.
Yeah. Someone asked in the chat about the language barrier, and it was rare that we couldn't communicate in some way. But lots of people there speak English, even if it's a little bit broken. And
my Spanish is improving, but very, very small.
We had a few people, who during the workshops who could speak Spanish. Gringo.
And we always have our guide, Diana.
Yes. Yeah. So it was pretty good.
I'm gonna share just a few images quick from Charleston, since we said we were going to talk about Charleston too. I will just say Charleston was also an awesome workshop. It feels like it was like a year and a half ago after the last month, but it really was just a month ago. And there's an image of Rick's RX1 with a filter in front of it, with a big 82 millimeter filter. It's not that big a camera, but you can see it truly is pocket sized when you pull that 82 millimeter adapter.
I literally had it in my pants pocket.
You did.
When we were out walking.
And this, if you'll notice, is a 400 millimeter portrait of Rick with Carol in the background there in Weidler Forest. I had a ton of fun. David and I, as we were wont to do when we get together, trade off our 800 and 400 and go dashing about. And I shot a lot with both lenses, and I still just adore them. And I will say, I think that that's one of the best things Nikon has done, is taken these really, really high quality long lenses and made them hand holdable, because being freed from being on the tripod with a big lens like that is just liberating. And I also shot a lot with my little Q2 in Charleston, my little Leica, which I'll be having some videos coming out about soon. I'll do a setup video soon. I truly have fallen in love with this little camera, not to replace my Nikons, but to kind of augment them, to have something small that's so high quality that I can work with. And I shot this image of Elizabeth and the snake in black and white, but I converted it to color on Rick's recommendation. Have you looked at that in color? And it really does work better in color. And I got lucky with the snake's tongue with a single shot. Didn't have to do that 120 frame per second burst mode.
And you mentioned this already, but I think it's worth repeating that, if you set your camera, your Nikon or your Q2 or your RX1 or my Sony's, you set your camera to shoot in black and white. It is only doing it as the sort of JPEG and the embedded JPEG of your file. You still have all of your color data. You can convert it back to color without any trouble whatsoever.
Assuming you're not shooting solely black and white in a monochrome mode. Yeah. Shoot JPEG. So as long as you shoot RAW plus JPEG, or simply RAW and look at the world in monochrome, I like to shoot RAW plus JPEG in black and white, so I can kind of see what the camera did, and then I can edit the RAW file and get even more out of it.
Yeah.
This was such a crazy moment. They have these places at the Magnolia Plantation Swamp where there are these planks for the alligators and turtles to sun themselves. But this trio just cracked me up. One of these days we're taking this swamp over, guys. Here's a birds in flight with the 400 with its teleconverter flipped on with David's camera. Beautiful light. That was towards the end of the day, the green heron. And then just to prove it can be done, I shot an entire sequence of this egret taking off with the stick on one side of the swamp and flying all the way to its nest with the 800 handheld. And I think I have one of 18 images that weren't razor sharp with the Z9. It's just amazing what we can do these days. We did have a number of alligator encounters. This one blocked the path for a while, and I was like, well, I'll just stay on this side. We had a great time at the South Carolina Center for Birds of Prey, which is a raptor rehabilitation center. They have some birds which can't be re-released to the wild, but they do a great service there. And then they host a private event for us where they fly birds. And one of the most fun parts of that is being in the owl garden. And you'll notice I was shooting here with my 105 1.4 because we were at close range in here. And just having that shallower depth of field of 1.4 lets you have a little bit less busy background with them coming at you. We had a great crew. Terry was keeping a lid on things here at the Swamp Garden. We had a really, really fun time. And Charleston's just a beautiful city. We had a great time, photographing the old and the new there. And it was a really, really wonderful workshop. Very different than Cuba. You bring a whole bunch of gear because there's so much wildlife involved and big lenses and fast bodies. Cuba was much more about keeping things minimal, staying lightweight, being able to travel and just enjoy the culture and capture it. So I think we got time for a couple of questions.
Okay. But Darren, you got anything over on YouTube? Any questions about any of the trips or any of that sort of stuff?
There was one when we were talking about the noise reduction stuff in Lightroom, Hudson. What percentage of denoise were you at? Were you messing with the settings there much, or just kind of taking defaults?
I'm going to do a video this week. It won't be approaching the scene. It'll just be a quick sort of shout out like I did when DxO launched Pure Raw 3, where I kind of compare Pure Raw 3 with Lightroom. I will say that I think that Adobe's done a really nice job of this. One thing that I love that On1 did was they had a few adjustments to the noise reduction in No Noise AI, but there was one slider in particular. Do you remember what the name of that slider is, Rick?
Which slide?
There's a sort of an overall intensity of the noise reduction in No Noise AI.
Yeah.
And I can't remember the name of the slider, but there's a slider that really goes from being minimal to being maximal. And Adobe has done that same thing. I feel like I've always liked the way that DxO handles their noise reduction. They have a light touch where they don't overdo it. I think that putting it front and center in the process is a really smart thing. You shouldn't be doing a whole bunch of masking and heavy duty contrast adjustments and all that kind of thing before you do hardcore noise reduction. And I feel like some of the software that's built to do it at the end of the process would often add artifacts and it would be propagating all those adjustments that you might have done or masks or things. And then it's finding edginess in places that it shouldn't in the image and creating artifacts. I thought that DxO and On1 did the nicest job putting it front end of the workflow and then letting you work with the new file that has less noise while retaining sharpness. I thought DxO did a nice job of sort of setting an automatic push a button in it, and it gives you something that maybe doesn't have quite as much noise reduction as you need, but you can always do a little bit more as you're processing the file. I think Adobe has given us a little bit of the best of both worlds. That intensity slider that they have, it gives you a zoomed in 100% view, which you can scroll to the most important part of the scene. For me, it'd be that bird's eye with some of the dark, shadowy background that was really noisy. And you drag the slider until the noise is reduced without really impacting sharpness any more than you need to. And then you can go and fine tune it with your standard detail sliders. You can sharpen the image, use the masking to make sure you're not sharpening any noise, pull even a little bit more noise reduction in that standard way that we did in Adobe that was really powerful. So you can take a 12,800 ISO image and move it down to where it looks a lot more like a 400 or an 800 ISO image and then clean it up the same way you would an image like that. That's exactly what I'm looking for. That's just fabulous. Yeah. And I think you go ahead, Rick.
I was going to say, I will say that, again, that referencing that piece by Eric Chan that I linked to earlier, he specifically says that the best workflow choice for using denoise is to do it first in the process. Because if you go through and you do masking, you do all of your basic adjustments and some extra stuff, that basically it's going to take a lot longer to build that DNG file. It works, you know. I took a couple of images that I had masked and everything else, but they took a long time on my old MacBook Pro.
I look at it like this. You know, you have a file that has too much noise in it. You know, one of the first things I would do in general is maybe set the black point and white point where I want it, shadows and highlights, and then go in and do noise reduction before you're going to do anything else, because you're really reorganizing how those pixels are displayed. And I want to see the base image before I'm editing that base image. And I think in particular, if you're using DxO or you're using this denoise in Lightroom, it's creating a whole new file even. You know, it is literally reinterpreting the data into a different representation that then I think you should go through and do your editing on. It's a very, very rich, editable DNG file. You know, I think that if you've got a noisy image, and again, you know, we've talked about this before, I don't think you need to do this on an image out of your Z9 that's shot and well exposed at 1600 or less. It's those really noisy images you can't handle with a pull of the noise reduction and sharpening and masking slider. Those ones where you're gonna lose detail if you try to do it traditionally. Run that denoise before you do anything else, then go through and do your basic editing on it.
Yeah. We had one question from Rich Horn, who asked if you could recommend any ND filters for the 400-28 TC. He says he has a polarizer, but he's trying to figure out, you know, is there an ND or diopter or some other options out there?
Well, no, he was talking about the little slot in filters. And
Right.
I did a video recently on just cool accessories for that, from Carl Zemlin's, you know, lens caps and custom hoods to cases, external UV filter, or even potentially better yet, the slot in filters, which have a circular polarizer and an ND filter for about the same price as Nikon's circular polarizer, which I haven't seen anybody get shipped yet. For me, you know, I'm not really shooting landscapes much with the 400 or the 800. It's much more of a wildlife tool. And for that, I want as fast a shutter speed as I can generally. But I will say that when we were in Beidler Forest, there were moments, you know, where there's a crocodile on reflecting water, and you look through that 400 or the 800 and drop the polarizer in there and spin it, and all of a sudden, woo, those reflections look much better. The contrast is popping. But you're going to lose, you know, a stop to a stop and a half of light using a polarizer, and you're already with the 800 shooting at a thing that's at 6.3 as its maximum aperture. So you do have to think of its effect on shutter speed. It's not a lens I'm going to use filters with a ton, but I think the polarizer can be particularly handy shooting wildlife and water. And David Archer felt the same way, I think. David, didn't you feel that it was a nice thing to have?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay. While we're on the filter world, Mark Steven asked, if your largest lens filter size is 77 millimeters, why should you purchase a magnetic 82 millimeter filter set? You know, especially if I assume I'm not going to buy an 82 millimeter lens.
I think that the best laid plans often change with future product releases and announcements. I felt the same way. And before I was working as an ambassador for Hoya, back when I purchased every piece of glass filtration like I do my lenses right now, you notice I sent back that 85 1.2 because I love my 105 1.4, but if lenses were free, I'd have kept it. I had an entire set of 77 millimeter filters, and I was quite happy with them until they came out with a new lens that was 82 millimeters, and it was a landscape lens, and I wanted neutral density in front of it. And I was like, ugh. And I had to sell all my 77 filters for next to nothing and buy 82 millimeter filters and step-up rings. The other thing I will say is that if you have a lens that goes wide, and it has a 77 millimeter filter thread, you can stack more filters in front of it and work with more impunity to vignetting with an 82 millimeter filter set than you can with the 77. And I find that even the 14 to 20, the 14 to 30 f4, you know, even at 82, I'd recommend people go to 112 or 95. If you ever want to custom order any Hoya stuff, Woody and I can get that stuff in an extra day. You know, if you want 95 versus 112, the 112 is, you know, there's nothing I've found that it causes vignetting on. Now, 82 with the case stuff doesn't vignette as bad, but with my old Hoya 82 millimeter filters on that 14 to 30, I had vignetting with a single polarizer on it or a single ND filter with a traditional thick casing. Even though it's an 82 millimeter and has 82 millimeter filter thread, a traditional filter caused vignetting at anything less than about 18 or 20 millimeters. So you're just giving yourself more room to work with a bigger set of filters, and you're also keeping your options open because, you know, I think there's one thing I've learned as a photographer, it's never say never.
Yeah. I would also rather have one set of filters. I mean, you know, when I started out, you know, it was like I had 3 polarizers, you know, because I had, you know, 77, 82 and a, you know, 67. And then I moved to the, you know, step up rings, you know, which is a lot easier. And, you know, that way you can keep your filters in sort of one filter pouch with all your step ups, you know.
You know, I spent a ton of time in Cuba with this little Q2 out on bright sunny days, and I would just pull its hood off and spin this little 49 millimeter to 82 millimeter adapter in, and bing, suddenly I got a polarizer.
Yeah.
I ran around with the 82 1.2 with a 3-stop ND on it. This is a 3-stop ND in front of my 105 1.4. This is the new Revolution ones, which I did find in Cuba have a pretty strong magnet. It is nice that it never ever came close to getting bumped. And they also have a single filter thread on the new Revolution filters, which lets you put a pinch cap on it, which is kind of nice because you can pinch and easily remove it without removing the filter, and then pull the filter off if you don't want it. But, you know, just to be able to shoot at 1.2 in bright daylight with the Z6 II, I kept bumping up against the 8,000th of a second shutter speed and 100 ISO. It was like overexposing at 1.2. So putting in a 3-stop filter, having a set of larger filters that work on everything, I'd rather have one $200 polarizer than 3 $70 polarizers that aren't that great.
Yeah.
In different sizes, let's put it that way. And I don't want to have $600 of polarizers. So that's my take.
Okay. I think the only other real, I mean, we didn't get a lot of questions this week. The other one that I've got that couple we've heard some stuff about is from Paul, who asked some questions about David Archer's kayak setup. Specifically, you know, does he use a tripod mount with it? You know, what's the name of the kayak he has? That sort of stuff.
You want to talk Hobie stuff for a second, David? Just give a rundown of what you have.
Yeah, my kayak is made for professional fishermen, but it works great for photography too because it's pedal driven and gives you your hands free. Got a real comfortable seat. The model is a PA14 with a 360 drive.
And it's a Hobie.
Yeah, Hobie. But no, I don't use a tripod because a tripod wouldn't work well in a boat because the boat's moving slightly and you'd be transmitting the motion to the camera itself. So just hand hold it. I'm usually in pretty calm water anyhow when I'm out shooting osprey and things like that. But I highly recommend it. But it's wide and stable. You can stand up in it. You can carry a ton of gear. It's got dry storage, but it's much heavier than any other kayak. It's close to 150 pounds. So you do need a trailer. You're not going to carry it over your head and throw it on top of the car.
Yeah.
But it has wheels on it. You just flip it over and stick these wheels in the scupper holes and rolls right from the edge of the water right to the parking lot. So it's real easy.
We did have another question that I think you'd be good to answer, David, because you've owned them both. You know, someone with the old F mount 400 2.8 was asking, you know, what can I do to make this lens hand holdable? And I think I know the answer you're going to say.
You could get a sky hook. You know, I had it too, and I loved it. And it was fantastic lens, but I was limited to tripod. It was so front heavy that I couldn't hand hold it at all. Really, not even one shot. You know, I could brace myself on a tree or a hood of a car or something sometimes, but standing hand holding it, no way.
Yeah, and that's an interesting point you make about it being front heavy. That's one of the things that works so well for the new lenses that they built for the Z system, is that the weight is way in the back on those lenses. So it winds up holding really well. I mean, it just, not only are they light to begin with, but the weight's balanced back towards the body of the camera, and it just makes it much easier. I mean, have you even used your 400 2.8 on a tripod much? Your new one?
No, hardly at all.
Yeah, I can count the number of times I've put the 800 on a tripod on one hand.
Really, only when I was in a blind.
Yeah.
Oh yeah.
That's the only time.
All right.
Occasionally
Well,
in my
guys.
backyard when I'm shooting birds for,
Sure.
you know, and the little water feature be there in a long time. But usually I just use a bean bag on my patio table.
I think the only time I've used the 800 on a tripod is to show that my tall fluid head handles it just fine here for a video.
Yeah.
All right, guys.
Well, guys, yep. Go ahead, Rick.
I was going to say it's been another fun-filled hour here. Remember that on the 23rd, we have a black and white gallery. Woody says he's already got the page up. So if you go to hudsonhenry.com/office hours, if you're ready to submit images. If not, you know, over the next couple weeks, don't forget to do so. We've got a couple months off before Glacier starts. So, you know, we're actually working on getting a couple of the 2024 workshops, the Eclipse workshop, Costa Rica. We're working on trying to get those so that people will be able to sign up for them, hopefully early this summer, more like around the time we go to Glacier. I think that's all I got.
Yeah, we do have that Mazatlan Eclipse workshop dialed in. We have rooms reserved at the perfect hotel to do it at, where we won't need to drive at all for anything, and the fun part of the old city. So we'll have that up and ready soon. We've heard from a number of you who want to go. That one will sell out quick.
Yeah, if you're interested, you can send an email to just put in the subject, I want to go to Mazatlan, and send it to rick@hudsonhenry.com, and I'll put you on the wait list. So, but the wait list is already pretty big. So
yeah, it is. All right, guys, that was fun. You know, this week, a lot of images from Rick and I. Next week, let's look at a lot of black and white images from you. Not next week, but at the end of the month.
3 weeks from today.
3 weeks from today. Let's look at a bunch of black and white images from you. All right, everybody. Thanks so much.
Take care, everyone. Be safe.
Thanks, Darren.
Thanks, Darren and Woody and David.